Okay, so I want to put two issues in tandem for this video. Um, I was going to talk about the US primaries, the latest results, and so on, but I decided for this one, because I was browsing through the different channels, we have satellite TV, so we have access to major news networks around the world. And I thought it would be interesting to put in tandem a political event that is actually going on in China right now. And that is the two sessions annual meeting of the CPC, Chinese Communist Party. Chinese politics within the Communist Party mechanism is very, very complex, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but based on the knowledge that I do have, I'd like to share a few thoughts, as well as thoughts on the latest developments with the US elections. I've just been watching both Bernie Sanders, so I'll start with the US first. Um, Actually, I'll start with an explanation as to why I'm putting these two situations in tandem. It goes without saying that the United States and China are the two most powerful countries in the world. I don't put Russia as number two, I put China as number two, because I believe Russia has been polarized in recent years to a much greater extent than China has. So that's why I put China at number two. Also, the Chinese economy is the world's second largest, so Russia's like number 11 or something. Um, So yeah, I just think it's interesting to compare the two systems as this is ongoing. So the US, I've been watching Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton speak to Brett Baer on Fox News. It's been another busy political night. Trump has been on a roll. He's won Hawaii, he's won Michigan, he's won Mississippi, and I think Ted Cruz won Idaho. Um, Bernie Sanders won Michigan. Hillary Clinton won Mississippi by a very big margin. In Michigan, it was a lot more close. Um, and I'm not sure if there was other Democratic results tonight. I think for the Democrats, it was just Mississippi and Michigan tonight. But anyway, it's a busy political night. There's obviously pressure on Rubio to drop out. Cruz is still a heavyweight contender, and it's quite obvious that the Republican Party is propping him up to be the anti-Trump figure at this stage. Kasich is doing well in his home state, and I think he's in second place in Michigan. But again, there's big questions for Kasich. Should he drop out? I mean, I'll say again what I've said in previous videos. I think this is a very, very unusual or exceptional election year. Now, candidates will say that in every election year, but I really, really think something about this year stands out as different. The two leading candidates in both respective parties, one is a deeply controversial figure who deeply divides opinion, who uses very bombastic language, and has managed to offend just about everybody, whilst also enjoying enormous support. The other is again a deeply polarizing figure who may well be investigated by the FBI, but attracts fiercely loyal support from her base. So I think we're going to see a November election unlike any for a very, very long time. Probably not like any in my lifetime. Um, as I understand it, the last candidates chosen at brokered conventions was 1948 for the Republicans with Dewey, sorry, and 1952 with the Democrats, Adlai Stevenson. So it's been a long, long time since a nominee has been chosen from a brokered convention. There's obviously a long way to go looking at the delegate counts. I mean, the candidates must be exhausted. Purely from a human side here, candidates must be absolutely shattered. Um, I want to say a quick word about Bernie Sanders. And this is not to say that I'm not going to endorse anyone at this point because A, I'm an outsider and it might look a bit like I'm sticking my nose in a bit too much, but I think that people need to really listen to Bernie Sanders when he speaks because he's been caricatured as this really hard left figure. And certainly he has some positions that I'm wary of, but I cannot but help but think that there is something very optimistic about the Sanders campaign. I mean, if you can say nothing else about him, if you're a Republican or if you're even someone who's conservative, at the very least, you need to acknowledge that Sanders has tried his level best to make it a respectful campaign. If no other reason, that is something that surely should be welcomed. Now, there are some positions that Sanders has I'm still a bit wary of, but he was asked about ISIS, and this is an example. I was wary about that. I thought, well, is he going to be too soft on ISIS? He gave quite a sound answer. He said ISIS is a barbaric organization that needs to be destroyed, but it needs to be local forces that do it. Now, I think a lot of Americans, like a lot of Britons, are tired of war. So Sanders didn't give a Neville Chamberlain answer. He said something needs to be done, but he's saying that it needs to be Muslim Arab led. That sounds to me like a reasonable answer. Um, and let's not forget in all of this, the Trump campaign uses a lot of nationalism. Donald Trump has praised Putin. That's not very patriotic to America. Um, anyway, I'm not going to throw in too many of my own views. That's just a few things I want to say. Um, Clinton will say, okay, my pro Democrat views are coming across here. I apologize for that, but I can't help it. I have to say, Clinton made a fair point. 250,000 people at least have been killed in Syria. In Libya, the figures are about 1,500. So why are the Republicans so obsessed about Libya? I think that is a fair point. This is not to say that Libya has been a success. I don't think it could be called a success. But I think what Hillary Clinton says about context is important. And the way the Republicans have used Libya, I think, has been to some extent looking almost desperate because there really is. It seems that they're really, really hammering her on this, and it's like a single track mind focusing on this and the email situation. That's going to transpire, and I don't know enough about that to comment in detail. Does look like it's turning out to be her Watergate, insofar as I'm not saying she's guilty. I'm saying insofar as how much attention is being put on it. Anyway, a few quick reflections on the American system at the moment. I will say one thing for Donald Trump, and believe me, I am not a Trump fan. You've probably worked that out by now. But what he has done is spoken out against the power of the media. Now, this is sort of like the pot calling the kettle black to me because I think Trump's just as bad. However, it is important that a candidate, even if it's Donald Trump, is holding the media to task on some level. Because he is right to say that there is institutional distortion. He hasn't used those words, but that's the implication he's making in mass media. Both CNN and Fox are guilty of it. Now, I've watched these elections very, very closely, and when I look at the punditry on both networks, I can't help but think a lot of these journalists are driven by their own ego. They may not be running for president, but I can't help but think some of them have an ego almost as big as Trump's, just that he's running for president. What I mean by that is they seem really overdosed on just analyzing every single little word that the candidates say. And obviously, they have a job to do. It's very important that you have a media that scrutinizes those in power. But I think both networks are guilty of blowing up things into an extent that goes well beyond the proportion which certain statements merit. I mean, Trump is a controversial character. Clinton is a controversial character, and it's fine to report that stuff, but there is something I do see what Trump is getting at with the power of mass media. Um, I can sort of see where he's coming from with that. In other words, the media can choose to make or break a candidate. Now, I think Trump's so super wealthy that it makes no difference. Um, Regarding wealth, it's indisputable that money plays a huge part in American politics. So these are all things that I'm reflecting on. Now, I've great affinity for the United States. I think it's a great country. Um, and I wish America all the best, whoever they choose. But clearly there is some flaws with the American system. Nevertheless, one thing that needs to be praised about the United States is the guarantee of the First Amendment, freedom of expression. America can come across, or the American media system, for example, can come across as very, very bombastic, but does demonstrate that pretty much anyone can have an opinion on anything. There's a reputation outside the States that people love to sue each other and so on, but I think no one can dispute that freedom of expression is deeply, deeply held in America, as it is here, and that is a very good thing. So there are many things about the US I like a lot. There's things I dislike a lot as well. That's a few reflections. Now, to move to China, and I won't comment so much on this because I'm not as familiar with the political system. This session, the 2 sessions Congress is going on, not even sure what the formal name is, but basically it's an opportunity for Politburo members, or I should say standing committee members, and their subordinates to answer questions to journalists. Yesterday, I caught a segment where there was international press asking questions. No Western journalists, but there was, for example, a Cambodian reporter asking about ASEAN. There was a Japanese reporter. Um, a lot of the answers were very typically Chinese Communist Party answers. What I mean by that is it's sort of very polite on one hand, but very nationalistic on the other. And it goes along something like this. I'll give an example. When the Japanese reporter asks about Sino Japanese relations, the Chinese party member said something along these lines. This is not an exact quotation, but wise people on both sides need to have strong relations. But Japan has made some mistakes in not being honest about its history. And we hope that the wise people on both sides can amend this situation. um, it's a very sort of polite answer, but also a biting answer. And the Chinese Communist Party are very good at this. What I mean is they're very, very good at sounding diplomatic and polite whilst actually being incredibly arrogant. It is arrogant because they're talking about Japan not being honest about the past. Well, that's complete hypocrisy because the Chinese Communist Party have been hiding their history for 60 years. They completely censor the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. I do admit at this point I'm biased because I hate communism, but nevertheless, I try to observe this situation without bringing emotions into it. And clearly, China is in a much better position in terms of civic freedom than it was in Mao's day. That's without question. The Chinese people are a lot more informed, and a lot of people have been lifted out of poverty. I give the CCP credit for that. It doesn't justify all the persecution they've done over the years, but they have lifted millions of people out of poverty. That is a major achievement, and I give them credit for it. Another area that I guess needs to be credited is Xi Jinping's anti corruption campaign. Now, this is very, very important. Corruption is a severe problem in China, as it is in many countries. There has been a lot of discussion about, well, is this really Xi trying to consolidate power for himself? Xi is the most powerful Chinese leader since Chairman Mao. There's no question about that. I think it's a bit of both. And I'm trying to take the positive with the negative. The negative could be that this is a power drive by Xi Jinping to basically get rid of his opponents within the party, which is obviously not good. On the other hand, I have no doubt that many of these people being held to account have been guilty of corruption. And in itself, on its own merit, that is a good thing. Corruption poisons progress. So, in itself, that is a good thing and it needs to be welcomed. I'm open minded enough, although I feel deeply uncomfortable with communism, I'm open minded enough to recognize progress where there is progress. And I think those of us who are staunch Democrats and are very critical of single party systems need to be practical. These systems are not going to change from outsiders simply saying it's terrible, everything's bad. We need to be open minded enough to welcome change where there is change. So I try to do that. Even though I've got strong views about communism. But I have to say, there was a party member, I forget all individual titles, it's a huge party, it's the world's biggest political party, but he was talking about socialist democracy. Well, the fact of the matter is, China, under no normal definition of the word, can be called a democracy. And let's not forget the origins of democracy are ancient Greece. Okay, so the Chinese Communist Party can't just reinvent the word to suit themselves. Democracy means the will of the people. Now, this is not to say that there's a revolution brewing in China and the average Chinese person suddenly wants to see an American or British style system. I'm not suggesting that for a second. But the simple fact is, it wouldn't matter either way because they don't have a choice. They simply don't have a choice. And there has been a number of my Chinese friends have expressed unease with this. I'm not going to talk about them in detail because I wouldn't want to put them at risk. But, and I say that in all seriousness, because China is still, it's an open country insofar as people can travel there, and it's far more open than North Korea, but it is still a single party state. People cannot freely criticize the party the way we could in the UK or the US. They just can't. So to talk about Chinese or socialist democracy is a bit of a mockery of the word. The facts are this: China has no free media whatsoever because every media outlet in China has to basically go through the filter of Communist Party approval. Yes, you will hear journalists asking questions, but they're always ultra polite. That indicates that these are pre approved questions. Now, you simply cannot have democracy when only one point of view is being heard, and that is a fact. At the moment, because it's a single party state, only one point of view is heard. That's not democracy, it's just not. They will talk about. I've got into a rigorous debate with someone I knew in China, I might add. I was in Shanghai, of all places, and I got into a rigorous but civil debate with her. She was trying to insist China was democracy. I was saying, look, she was trying to say that there were other parties in China. The point I was making was that these so-called other parties really are just like they're very small parties that are umbrella branches of the main Communist Party. They're not truly independent parties at all. They can't be called opposition. It's basically because the Communist Party is such a big political party, of course it's going to have different factions. That's not democracy because it is still all communist. That is not democracy. It's just not. There are no parties that can openly advocate free market economics or freedom of the press or stronger civil liberties. They can't do that. So these so-called other parties are really just branches of the main Communist Party. That's pretty obvious. China is still a country that jails lawyers on large scale. For example, lawyers standing up for environmental activists and so on. And the point I'm making with all of this is not to say that the US is perfect, is not to say that the UK is perfect, but I'm just stating facts here. China is also a country that deeply, deeply censors its past. This is indisputable. You simply cannot openly talk about the Cultural Revolution or darker aspects of China's past. You can't do it because in Chinese textbooks, they simply whitewash the issue. It's a fact. And I know this for a fact because I have a Chinese textbook. This isn't a Western textbook about China, it's a state education textbook. So I know what I'm talking about in this regard. Another thing that's very obvious, and I guess you could say this about the US as well, especially under Trump, neo nationalism. Um, Xi Jinping at the moment is fiercely promoting Chinese nationalism. Now, on the surface, the impression he's trying to give with Chinese people is this is a good thing. It's making us strong. It's China standing up for itself. And anyone who knows Chinese history knows that China is a country that was humiliated for many years by the great powers. So this is always, always going to be attractive to the Chinese people. The problem is, all this military talk is basically a distraction from domestic problems, from the sort of issues that I've been talking about. like environmentalists being arrested and a lot of things that really do impact a very large number of people. Now, the average Chinese citizen doesn't necessarily want democracy, but they do want officials to be held to account. Now, she has been doing that, but the point I would make is you can never have full accountability so long as it is a single party system, so long as journalists are constrained by what they can and can't ask. You'll never have a true democracy. Um, and there's no question that in the Xi era, beginning around 2013, there's been a promotion of neo nationalism in a way that's very profound. There is the issue in the South China Sea. I'm not going to weigh too much into that. I do believe China has been behaving like the regional bully, but it's, they will always find an excuse for that. But basically, the Communist Party propaganda people are in full mode, and there is another truth to this, and it's an uncomfortable truth, but it is the truth. They actually do employ people to go online, cybernats as I would call them, and promote their propaganda and attack anyone who criticizes it. So I have no doubt about it. There will be a Chinese national coming onto this video and fiercely criticizing me about how ignorant I am about China. The fact of the matter is, the Communist Party employs these people. They'll deny it, but a significant portion of them are employed directly by the Communist Party to go out and promote Communist Party propaganda. The Communist Party is very clever. They know how to manipulate, they know how to fight their corner. It's natural. They don't want to lose power. It's completely natural. Nothing surprising about it. But those are the facts. So all I would say is, I'm not saying this from a point of view of being anti-China. Far from it. In fact, I'm very, very fond of China. Don't believe me? Why would I have a Chinese flag hanging in my? However, I can never, ever, ever be comfortable with a single party system that is deeply dishonest about its past, um, and will not be honest about a lot of what's going on now. I'm not saying the Democrats and Republicans are either, but the difference is this: in America and in the UK and in France and in other democratic countries, people can have a voice. Now, in China, yes, people can have opinions, but those opinions are still restrained. They are. People might not want to admit that, and I appreciate that this might irritate some people because the truth is, Chinese citizens, even if they agree with what I'm saying, they can't do anything about it. But maybe the perception is this: maybe it is, well, this Western guy is telling the truth, but what's the point because we can't do anything about it anyway? So if the choice is between agreeing with this foreigner or just being nationalistic, let's be nationalistic. It's human nature. So these are just some very candid thoughts on my view of the current situation in the world's two most powerful countries. And one last thing: if this has come across as excessively negative, that is really, really, really not the intention. I think there's definitely positive things can be seen in both countries. And for the sake of the world, I hope both countries get it right.